Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
One marvelous scene. Of course, the series created by YouTuber Nando V Movies with the idea to bring together a group of remarkable YouTubers to talk about their favorite scenes in the MCU. I realized that me and Justin are a little late and otherwise uninvited, but we needed some way to come down from that endgame high that we're still riding. So here we are, Captain America, the First Avenger. This movie is an unsung classic of the MCU. I call it unsung because people don't really talk about it anymore, mainly because it's really old. I think this came out in like 2010-ish, 2010. It's really old, and mainly people just talk about the newer Captain America movies these days, i.e. The Winter Soldier and Civil War, which are really good movies, and that's part of why no one really talks about this one anymore. I also call it a classic, though, because it sets up this character so well, and it does a fantastic job of laying the foundation that Captain America stands on for the rest of the MCU. So, the scene in question today takes place the night before Steve first gets injected with the super soldier serum, and this German scientist is explaining to him why he was chosen to be the first soldier to try it. So up until this point in the movie, we've seen that Steve is just this ratty little guy. He has all these health issues, allergies, and whatnot, and basically he had to beg to even get admitted into the army in the first place. And even once he gets into the army, we see that he struggles to keep up with the other soldiers, and there are plenty of other guys out there that are much more able than he is, you know, like top-of-the-line soldier dudes. So with all that being said, I'm going to shut my mouth, and we're going to play the clip.
The serum amplifies everything that is inside, so good becomes great, bad becomes worse. This is why you were chosen. Because a strong man who has known power all his life may lose respect for that power, but a weak man knows the value of strength and knows compassion.
Thanks. I think.
Whatever happens tomorrow, you must promise me one thing. That you will stay who you are.
Not a perfect soldier, but a good man.
To the little guys.
My first impressions of this scene and what makes it so marvelous is how they set up the ideals of Steve Rogers so well, and how they really establish kind of what his character is going to embody throughout the rest of the MCU.
And this is the first time that we're introduced to that idea of Steve Rogers being a good man. So even though up until this point, you know, we know that he is wanting to be a soldier, he's wanting to fight in the war, he doesn't like bullies, this is the first time it's laid out for us that he has this great heart, and that's what makes him special. The super serum really is just a formality, you know, just to get him from A to B, because he needs to be able to hold his own physically. But that's really not important to Captain America. In a way, it sets Steve up to be the great constant of the MCU that he is, because we've seen throughout 10 years of these movies that he's always been the moral compass of the MCU. And in a time of need, all the other characters will always look to Steve to know, you know, what the right thing to do is. So he's definitely lived up to that idea. For example, in The Winter Soldier, he has to take a stand against S.H.I.E.L.D., who, you know, up until that point have been the good guys, right? Once he sees that S.H.I.E.L.D. is doing something that he sees as wrong, he decides to stick his neck out and do what's right. Just like that quote from Civil War in Peggy Carter's funeral. I don't remember it off the top of my head. I'll put it on the screen. But it says something along the lines of, even when the whole world is telling you that something is wrong is right, it's your duty to plant yourself like a tree and basically, you know, stand strong in what you know is right. But me and you have also talked about how Endgame kind of played off of this idea. Even though Cap is definitely one of the favorites of the MCU, he's far from the most powerful. As a matter of fact, he might even be one of the weakest out there.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. It even comes up, I think they even play it off as somewhat of a joke in the MCU, talking about the most powerful Avenger, and it's always in terms of strength, he doesn't compare to the likes of Thor or Captain Marvel or Scarlet Witch, some of these really OP Avengers.
It's completely true, but that brings me straight into my next point that I wanted to ask you about. Could Captain Marvel lift Thor's hammer?
Well, I guess,
Could Scarlet Witch lift Thor's hammer?
no, I don't think
They're
so.
not, no, man. They're not lifting it. Steve Rogers can. He can, and we've seen it. And this is beside the point, but it was freaking awesome, too.
Oh, it was amazing.
So we've seen now after Endgame how that quality, that trait of being a good man is essentially his superpower. We've seen how that pays off. I think there's really two ways that you can look at how that has paid off as a superpower for him. Number one, he has this power and influence because other heroes in the MCU look up to him. He's the great leader of all these movies and all these characters. People love to fight on his side because they recognize that he is a good man, and it's an honor for them to fight for his cause. The second thing is that, like we just mentioned, his worthiness is what allows him to pick up Mjolnir. He ended up being pretty powerful in that moment. I mean, it seemed like he could have taken on Thanos all by himself.
Right, it's actually interesting that it was his worth, that, like you said, that imbues him with that power. And it was kind of, it's cool that they can validate that with
Exactly.
a mechanism in the MCU, with him lifting Mjolnir. And I think one of the things that makes it really powerful for me is that it wasn't really necessarily even the serum that makes him special or like a superhero, like you're saying. It's not his superpowers, but his super persona, and that he embodies leadership and self-sacrifice in a way that maybe no other Avenger does.
Exactly, kind of how I said earlier, that in a way is his superpower. And that idea, and this scene specifically, kind of embody that. That what's really the most special thing about Steve Rogers is his persona, is the fact that he is a good man, and then, of course, the super serum and all that comes after that. This kind of reminds me of what me and my brothers have started calling Yinsen moments in the MCU. So a Yinsen moment is when the hero of the story is having kind of a heart-to-heart talk with a mentor of theirs, and the mentor drops some kind of wisdom on the hero that will define what the hero's ideology is going to be moving forward. Kind of a moment of clarity where they realize the true meaning of something or what kind of person or hero they want to be. We call it Yinsen moment because of the first instance of this, which is in Iron Man 1, when Tony Stark is escaping that cave with a guy called Yinsen. Just before sacrificing his life, he has this talk with Tony, and he basically says, "Don't waste your life, Stark. And I know, I've seen that you have this potential to be something great, and I pretty much just give you your life back, so, don't waste it." And we see that Tony lives up to that as he eventually becomes the key of bringing back half of humanity in Avengers Endgame. So this moment, this scene that we've been looking at, is really Steve Rogers' Yinsen moment. But what's really unique about this one, when you compare it to other moments like this that we've seen, is this doctor, this scientist, is telling Steve to stay the same. He's telling him, like, you already have a good heart, you're a good man, and what I'm asking is for you to not change. That's all that I need. Whereas in other cases, you'll normally see these talks are kind of someone saying, look, this is the truth. This is kind of what you need to work toward. This is what you need to strive toward. But in this case, it's like, you're right where you need to be mentally. Like, don't let this super power, this super yacked out body change the way that you look at things.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. I think you're right about these Yinsen moments, and I think this one in particular is interesting in the case of Captain America. One of the things that I love about these Yinsen moments, like you're saying, is
That's
the
a
fact,
great term.
Yeah, what a term. I mean,
gonna need a
patent
on that thing.
Yinsen. One of the things that I love about these moments is that it just goes to show how much the MCU values the character over like the bells and whistles. Like, it wasn't for Iron Man, it wasn't about the suit. Like, all of this was really cool. It's not about the special effects or anything like that.
Right.
The root of the story is the fact that they have really strong characters, and then their ideologies kind of are consistent throughout each of the movies.
Yeah. Even in the weakest of the MCU movies, what really drives them forward is the work that's done with the characters. In the first Avenger, as that scientist dies, he gives Steve one last reminder. He points to his heart. He can't even say any words. I think he just got shot, if I remember right. But he's on the ground, and he kind of taps Steve's chest, getting across that idea one last time that it's his heart, what's inside that makes him great. And even though now he's got this super chiseled, just incredible physique, my goodness. Even though he's got that, it's it's his heart
So you're saying he wasn't pointing at his bicep?
He's saying, look how awesome your chest is. You're welcome.
No. It's interesting also in that scene how the Doctor mentions to Captain America that people with power already, who acquire more power, can become complacent and, you know, take that for granted. And I really love how Captain America's story starts with him with no power. And he never takes that for granted. He never sees that as something that he can manipulate, or, you know, he's never been corrupted by that. But rather he's been, like you said, the constant of the MCU, the true one and one.
The red, white, and blue, baby.
The red, white, and blue.
Yeah, he fights for the little guy because he was the little guy.
He was pretty small compared to Thanos too.
He is tiny. Even, you're talking post-serum?
Yeah, even post-serum.
He's pretty tiny. He's like half his size. Imagine pre-serum.
Basically Ant-Man.
So, that was our quick take on this marvelous scene featuring Captain America, or as I call him, the Star-Spangled Man with a plan.
And America's